Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluent Sports podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sporting landscape. Today, I am very excited to go ahead and bring in the CEO of USA Lacrosse, Marc Riccio, to the show, where we're going to dive in and learn about the rapidly growing sport of lacrosse here in the US. It's not my story to tell though. So Marc, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me, Scott.
Yeah, super excited. And as I highlighted, we get the opportunity to sit here and learn sort of from a bird's eye view of what's going on in the sporting landscape. And, lacrosse is going through some really exciting times. So, Marc, before we dive into all the nuances of what's going on in the space, I think it's most important to understand a little bit about the person at the helm of this. So let's dive in. Who is Marc, and how did you end up as the CEO of USA Lacrosse?
Well, appreciate that opportunity. So I've been in the seat for coming up on 4 years, and I'll admit I didn't really anticipate being here, but I've been loving it. So my background is I grew up in Western New York, small town in the Finger Lakes. I did play lacrosse. I was fortunate enough to go on and play at the collegiate level at Hofstra University, which is down on Long Island. And in fact, that's where my first job came. I ended up working at the university for a while, and it gave my first taste of working in sport, doing marketing and fundraising for athletics. From there, I got a job over at the New York Jets, and that came about because the Jets training camp was on the campus of Hofstra University, and I spent 17 seasons working at the New York Jets, all in the front office, all on the business side. Left there and went to work for a small event company, and we ended up rolling that small event company into a larger global agency, Lagardère Sports, which rebranded as Sport 5. So I spent several years working in a global sport environment, which is a great understanding of not only USA stick and ball sport, but also global sport, which was a great learning for me. I did some work after that in venture capital, advising, and again, another great learning and understanding startup land. And then I was working for a small law firm and IP consultancy, and I loved it. But this job opened up, and it was kind of those once in a lifetime opportunities because I love the game, love its mission, and its impact changed my life for the better. And I threw my hat in the ring and survive and advance. And here I am 4 years later.
How cool, man. How cool. And as a lifelong Bills fan, I won't hold it against you that, you worked for the Jets for almost 2 decades, but I'm glad to see there is some winning coming out of that organization, and we'll leave it at that.
Listen,
So
I have a soft spot. I have a soft spot for the Bills. I'm from Western New York, and
I
so
was
all
going
my
to
friends I grew up with are Bills fans. So yes, I'm the outlier, and yes, it's been tough running, but I got a soft spot for the Bills.
listen. I think every sports fan should have a soft spot for the Bills, but that's for another show, Marc. And, I want to touch on this. Like, I think this is so cool before we sort of dive into USA Lacrosse, but, as you reflect back on your journey with lacrosse, right? And when you were coming up and playing it and looking where the game is at now, talk to us a little bit about the growths and iterations that you've seen to the game. And I think the direct question is, could you ever imagine that lacrosse would be, the mainstay that it is when you were playing it, coming up as a young kid?
The short answer is no. I did not really expect where we are today. And if you look back at that moment, lacrosse was very much focused on the Mid-Atlantic, the Baltimore region, Long Island, and Western New York. And Western New York is the ancestral home of the game. Lacrosse is the oldest team sport in the Americas. Haudenosaunee, Native Americans created the game. They passed it on and shared it with the rest of the world, and that's been the ancestral home. But from there, it has blossomed across the U.S. Now there are 90 nations that are members of World Lacrosse, our international federation. And rewind 25, 30 years ago, was the Haudenosaunee, which is the Native Americans, U.S., Canada, Australia, Great Britain. That was kind of your mainstays, and certainly it's expanded greatly from there. So I didn't really expect that. But I think it speaks to the quality of the game, the growth of the women's game. They are two different games, although they're both called lacrosse. The men's version and the women's version are a bit different, which again is a uniqueness to this. Mm-hmm. So it's got great spiritual roots. It's highly athletic. It's like a lot of other games. It's actually like watching a basketball game. It's more like hoops than any other sport. So I think people recognize that, but then it's got the physicality of sports like football and other sports that people gravitate to. So it has really grown organically simply by the nature of the game. And as people have They've brought the game with them. So we've been fortunate to ride that wave.
That's really cool. Quick shout out to a buddy of mine, Brett Hughes, who works with Lacrosse the Nations. And, it's really neat to watch the game, not just expand here domestically, but now you start to see this as an international sport as well. But I think, Mark, there's a lot of different nuances as we start to drill down into the game of lacrosse. You mentioned the men's and women's game is different. There's indoor box. There's all kinds of different forms of lacrosse. Talk to us a little bit from the NGO lens. What role does, US lacrosse play across the ecosystem? And what is the mission and vision through your lens as you guys are, governing this sport as it's growing?
So you bring up some really important factors there. I think one is mission. So as a governing body, we are a 501c3 mission-based organization, which is a fancy way of basically saying our job is to generate revenue, but not retain it for profit. We must take that revenue and invest it back in the mission. And for us, the mission is 11 words, 3 objectives: fuel the growth, enrich the experience, field the best national teams. Now, you can go deep on each of those and what they mean and how you do it, but that's the core mission, the North Star, and that is consistent for both the men's game and the women's game. But you also reference different versions of the game, or what we call disciplines. And the way to equate it is when you have alpine skiing, you've got downhill, you've got moguls, you've got slalom and giant slalom. Similar, you have lacrosse, but you have the field version of the game, which you see generally at the collegiate level, high school level, and is the most predominant version of the game played. You have box, which is indoor, much like a hockey arena, and that's a 6-on-6 type style of play. And then you have what's called sixes, and that discipline is the Olympic discipline. And there's lots of reasons how that came to be, but that is very much like a hoops game. It's on a smaller field. It's still a stick and ball, and the premise remains the same. You're going up and down the field, but there are nuances to that version of the game. There's not draws and face-offs after a goal. The whole design of that version is to fit within a very tight window of time, so it's more digestible. It's a better streaming product. It's also a bit more intuitive for the casual viewer, and actual less players also makes it more appealing for the Olympic style of play to be part of LA28, which is something we're now a part of. So we educate coaches, we set up infrastructure, we work with town, local community groups. We have over 400,020 members annually that we work with, clubs. So it does run the gamut. And then we work certainly with the NCAA and the NFHS, which is the National Federation of High Schools, which oversees the high school version. So we work up and down the playing pyramid, as we call it, to try to bring structure, cohesiveness, continuity across all those disciplines.
Very interesting. No, and that's really cool. And I think we could spend the whole show just sort of breaking that down, Mark, but I'm always curious from a pipeline development, right? Are you watching similar skill sets developed with the more traditional versions of the game that translate into the sixes product? Or are you guys having to do more specific training and development to ensure that we put the best, team on the field for the Olympics?
Yeah, it's actually different. And so you bring a really nuanced question to the table in that an athlete that is competing in a field discipline is playing on a 100+ yard field. And so the demands of that athlete are different than the athlete playing on a sixes field, which is roughly 60 to 70 yards in length and more narrow. So it's a tighter space. So we act, and we're all, as a lacrosse sport across the entire world, are building this discipline as we fly it, so to speak. So there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of strategy and tactics. And so we actually have 4 quadrants of the tactical, the strategic, the physical, and the mental. That's how we evaluate athletes and how we assess our capabilities. So we're tracking all athletes with GPS systems, and the loads and demands and acceleration and the torque and all of that is different in the sixes discipline than it is in the field discipline. And so what does that prototype or that archetypical athlete that's going to be most successful at sixes is different than that in the field game. There's no specialization. Everybody's got a small stick in the field game. So generally you need speed, you need burst, and you generally need all around better athletes in the sixes discipline because you're playing an offense and defense, you're subbing on the fly. With all of that said, We are developing and building as we play it, which is uniquely interesting for everybody because there's no
Yeah.
competitive advantage for anybody.
Oh, interesting. And we're seeing, like we're at this moment in time where there's hyper specialization in sports, but, there's a lot of really gifted athletic folks that are playing maybe a different game that could actually translate really well to being a lacrosse player. So with you saying that it sort of mimics a basketball, right? Do you guys only pull from the current folks that are playing the game of lacrosse, or are you doing athlete identification and then sort of educating them on this new sport as it develops?
It's leaning towards the latter of the two.
Interesting.
Is yes. So a couple interesting points to this. One is we do, and you referenced it in the last question, the pipeline. We do talk about base of pyramid to tip of pyramid. And the more athletes, the more people we get playing at the base of the pyramid, the more athletes you have to choose from at the tip of the pyramid. And ideally you get, better teams, etc. With that said, one of the challenges with specialization in the US, and this is a youth sport in America problem, is that specialization starting at an earlier age is really not developing kids that are late bloomers. They feel intimidated to try a skill-based sport like lacrosse later as a kid. And that's a real problem for us. With that said, small-sided play, meaning 5-on-5, 6-on-6, no equipment, is the optimum way to start playing lacrosse at a young age. And this is proven out. At hockey does it exceptionally well, where you're on ice and it's very small. In our case, you touch the ball more often. It's just more
100%.
fun as a kid when you touch the ball more often. Touching the ball more often also gives you better skill development. And also, you're not specializing. You're not specializing for defense or offense. You are just playing the game. And the idea behind that is you don't have to be, 6'2", 280, or, as a woman, 6'1", 180 and run a 4.3 40. You can be smart, you can be intelligent, you can be crafty, ambidextrous, like all of those things you can develop and be successful. It's not as physically required that it might be, say, in a football or in hoops or in volleyball. And so athlete development matters.
Yeah.
Being a multi-sport athlete matters a great deal. And so if you're playing basketball or field hockey in particular, like those are great sports around athlete development that we are now starting to look at how do we develop.
It's super interesting. And I imagine this lowers the barrier to entry to get into the game. I think like hockey and lacrosse, there's always been this notion or stigma that it's more of an elite game, right? It's more of an affluent game. And so I think as we talk about this, like this opens the aperture to get more folks introduced to the game. Like you said, touching the ball more and engaged with it, and then more opportunities to continue to grow. I'm curious, as we start to look at more and more capital flowing into the youth sports world, I think this is sort of like a tale of the pipeline development, from the US lacrosse lens, like how do you guys protect the integrity of the game as we continue to watch, different modes of commercialization happen, and sort of how do you find that harmony between the two?
The harmony is a great goal.
It's what we're having for, right?
It is, but my take on this stuff has actually been, I come from a commercial background. In part, that's what I was brought on to do in terms of commercialization of the sport. And I want to share this. The beauty of our role is revenue generation is at the utmost importance of what we do. And that's for stability, that's for growth. That's not profit maximization. Those are two different things. Generating revenue to invest back in your game, in your sport, and your mission is different than maximizing profit. We don't have a profit maximization mandate. And so that allows us to be financially savvy and smart, but it's not for profit. It's actually to invest back in the game. So that's an important distinction that I want to draw. When I talk about commercialization and revenue, it's because we get to put it back in. It's not because I'm trying to line somebody's shareholder's pocket. That's not what we do.
It's really cool. And that's a great distinction. I think, a lot of people sort of hear the blanket and they always go to one extreme there. I think understanding your guys' position as the NGO, right? The more we earn, the more we can reinvest and grow the game, I think is a really, really hard line in the sand to draw. So I appreciate you going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. And that's always something I always remind the staff of that, remind people externally about that, because I think it matters a great deal. So I look at private equity and commercialization. It's not going away. It's here to stay. So you might as well work together. And I've actually talked to several private equity firms and entities that are owned by private equity in the youth sports space, because I've gone to them and said, listen, you have investors. Investors want a return on their investment. To get a return on your investment, you need to grow your enterprise value. To grow your enterprise value, you need to grow your addressable audience. Well, we want to do the same thing. growing addressable audience is one of our core pillars to our long range plan. We can work with you on that proverbial top of funnel entrance into the game to have a positive experience and move people down the funnel or up, we call it move them up the ladder, and they're playing, experiences from experiencing the game, maybe in gym class or a multi-sport organization, to going to a local town and rec program that's accessible, maybe sixes, that is a lower barrier to entrance, have a great experience, and then go on to maybe an organized club that, if financially or reasonably that's in their cards, or stay within a community group that's competitive and enjoyable, onto high, scholastic and so forth. And so that's the customer funnel. We have the same objective of putting people into the top of the funnel. And so the private equity firms and these organizations, they've responded to that. They get it. That's talking to them in their language. It makes total sense. Now, turning that into actionable programming and products and businesses, we've had varying degrees of success with that. I'm working with some now to actually try to achieve that. But there's been a strong openness to do so. And I actually do think we'll get there. The question is, how do you do that at scale? Like any private equity wants scale. Youth sports is a very local thing. Like politics, youth sports is local. And so that's one of the nuances that we have. Like, we've got people in the region throughout the US. We know local markets better than anybody. And so how do we work with the local operators, including private equity quite potentially, to develop the right business models for point of entry? Maybe it's low margin, but it's part of the acquisition funnel. So I'd say we're in the middle of it, but I look at it as like, you're going to invest. Let's just do it the right way to drive future growth.
Yeah. And I think that cohesion you're talking about is key, right? Like, I mean, we've watched it. There's just been fragmentation from the NGO as we get down deeper and deeper to the regional level. And I think that as we commercialize, there are opportunities to take those shared service models and bring them across and ultimately elevate the whole ecosystem of, lacrosse or whatever sport you're overseeing. It's really interesting to hear it through your lens there. Now, this is a timely question, and I think it's somewhat in line with what we're talking about. Last week we saw the House rule come down from the NCAA, and from what I understand, there's been a pretty strategic and linear path of, we're going to play rec into scholastic into collegiate then into pro. As we look at, these universities having to reevaluate what budget cycles look like in sports, what does the future look like of lacrosse? Do you see that the college is going to be the natural, stepping point out of high school, or do you see other leagues stepping in? How are you guys thinking about that with some of the shakeup that we're seeing right now?
So, like everybody, I actually don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. You don't have the crystal ball, Mark?
I do not have the old crystal ball, the magic 8-ball. With that said, this goes back to the earlier question around being strong financially. Is the stronger we are as a game and as a sport financially, the less likely you're going to get disruption that is unhealthy, meaning that people will make decisions on your behalf versus you being able to control your own destiny a little bit as a game. So I think financial viability matters. One of the things, there's a couple of things we have going for us. One, particularly at the collegiate level, you have both Division I, but more kids are playing collegiate at Division II and Division III in lacrosse than Division I. I'm not saying that's neither good nor bad, but there's a very healthy both Division III ecosystem for lacrosse and a very healthy college club ecosystem for both men and women. So that's positive. I would say, at the Division I level and even at the Division III level, lacrosse punches above its weight in fundraising. That is really important as a university analyzes its impact to lacrosse. So that's, a check mark for the good. The other check mark for the good is oftentimes lacrosse players are kids that are paying tuition. And as a university or a college, if you can establish that's net new tuition, particularly at a moment with birth rate declining, less boys going to college and the college enrollment for boys declining, if you can use sport as a net positive when you map out your P&L, again, that weighs to our favor. With that said, you got coaches that are concerned at the collegiate level that they will be negatively impacted when, universities have to make hard decisions around funding. I do know that college coaches are spending a lot more time in fundraising, not just for nice to haves, but for must have operational dollars. And so, that's a challenge. I'd like to say we're in solid footing. The Final Four, for college at the Division I level championship is considered a revenue generator. They 30, 40,000 people at these, at the Final Fours, 15,000 for the women game, for the women's Final Four. So financially, I think there's a lot of upside. I think we got to do a better job of aligning our interests financially across our sport. and
Yes.
not fully aligned. It's interesting. You're nodding, so I'd be curious your perspective on that. I'm hopeful this will continue to push us all in that direction, because I think when you look at what sports have potential to be elevate, lacrosse is one of them. I'd say volleyball for sure, flag football. I think other sports are a bit more saturated. I think we've got upside, frankly. So I'm
Huge.
hopeful this will help us get there.
Huge upside. And before I get to the Olympics and share my opinion, I think it's a natural segue, with what Paul's built at the PLL, right? Like, and that's where I was sort of going with this, right? Like, like college has always been what sounds like a very healthy ecosystem, but, the PLL has brought in a lot of attention to the sport, right? Both on the men's and women's side. I'm curious from like a US lacrosse side, like how do you guys align with some of these emerging leagues where we're watching other opportunities for commercialization of the sport?
Well, I think what Paul Rabel and Mike
Yep.
Rabel, his brother, have done have been awesome. It has been great for the game. And they have brought a level of visibility, a level of relevance and conversation around the men's and women's game that we did not have previously. And we all benefit from that. And I can't say enough good things. And I think to your point, that speaks to the ecosystem. If you as an athlete can have a pro opportunity to play the game that is going to pay you well, and then from a networking perspective, advantage you that much more, because lacrosse has got a great network of individuals. That's highly compelling for a younger athlete who's deciding where they might want to focus, that if lacrosse is real, it's a game for me. That's important for that to get great athletes in at a younger age. So it also raises the conversation around ESPN and just the whole ecosystem. And I will say the National Lacrosse League, Brett Freud, the new commissioner there, they've done a great job. They are looking and have done a good job of continuing to not reinvent, but reshift their focus commercially in ways that maybe they hadn't in the past that I think have been good. And we actually work really closely. We created an initiative called Elevate 28, which is bringing together Paul in the PLL and Brett in the NLL and USA Sports and World Lacrosse, our international federation, the men's and women's college coaching associations. And we've all come together around this effort to grow the game at the youth level, because again, that proverbial rising tide raises all boats. It's one thing that benefits us all. So they've done a great job, and that's part of the ecosystem. We work very closely with the PLL and the NLL. Our athletes, our national team athletes, are professional athletes. It creates a high level of coordination with them around calendar, around athlete load, and all those things. So we work with them on the marketing side and growth, and we also work certainly on the high performance side as well.
No, it's really neat. And I was going to go to Elevate 28, right? And I think that's, like there's this really neat inflection point that is, a few years on the horizon, but it gives us nice runway to build up to it. I want to go, and steer this direction a little bit, putting your CEO executive hat on, right? And so like, as you're making decisions, right, obviously alignment and unification is huge. I think, the sum of all of our voices is better than just one standalone. But like, how are you making decisions where it's really challenging? We can't look back at, deep historical data. Some of this is more gut versus what's actually the data is telling us. When you're forced to make some of these decisions going and putting the sport on a global scale for the first time, what's the rubric that you look through to make sure you're putting the organization and the sport in the best place to succeed?
Wow. Well, I will say we do really focus on data-driven decision making. We are fortunate that we have a lot of data within the organization. The data is not always insight. Turning that data into insight and clearly defining the problem statement. What are we solving? Are we a mile wide and an inch deep? Is this core to our mission? So we do definitely start with data. But to your point, as our chief of staff, head of business intelligence tells me, like, it's just a data point. It's not the answer, it's a data point. And so we use data to support judgment, not replace it. So we start there. The things that I look at is certainly, one, trying to get the most informed decision that we possibly can. That sometimes means pushing a decision off just a little bit to try to get that much more information. Two, is it core to our mission? Does it materially advance our mission? And we have 3 business goals every year. And those business goals are total participation across the U.S., revenue generation as an organization, and performance of our national teams. And so does that decision support the annual operating plan, which supports those goals? And if it doesn't, we've got to either not now, put it aside. The other thing I really look at is the obvious cost benefit. I'm a big cost benefit analysis. And then the last thing, our likelihood of success. Said, okay, all these could be true, but are we really likely to achieve success? And if so, what's the cost of that? What's the long-term runway to that? Yeah. And when in doubt, I also say this all the time. Well, I know what we do if we do nothing. So I lean towards action, and I'm okay. And I think we've gotten to a much better place in taking responsible risk. And what's interesting, people don't like to take risks because they don't like to fail. a lot of times, and I'm like, failure, like, that's okay. Learn, adapt, go again. And so I think we've gotten much better at that. So we've taken risk here, and like, we've hit on some, and candidly, we've missed on some, but we got smarter from it. And, I'd like to think that end product will be better because of it. But likelihood of success and that responsible risk taking. The other thing is, and I'll leave it on this one, is action, action, action. Like, we got urgency. Like, as Yogi Berra would say, when we talk about LA 28 and the runway there, it's getting late early. So we got to go.
I think that might be the quote from the whole podcast. It's getting late early. I mean, and it's so true, right? Like, 3 years, we're going to snap our fingers and it's here. And, I have a 3-year-old and I'm scratching my head this Father's Day. I was like, where did that time go? So, a lot of moving parts, a lot of cohesion to bring together, as this platform, both, having the Olympics and then having it domestically, I think is a perfect opportunity to really catapult the sport, far beyond what it's doing now, which is incredible. Let's talk a little bit about, legacy of the role, right? So now you're sitting here, you're in the trenches, you're building, but this is a unique moment, right? To be at the helm as you lead into the first Olympic Games. How much time do you think about, the legacy of what you're building?
I actually do think about it. I know some of those people think, no, do the work, but no, I think about it. It's front and center to me. And I also think about it in terms of when I talk to the staff, like, this is your legacy moment too. It's not just about me. This is your legacy moment. And in your career, you get few opportunities to really have a legacy moment. And we do. And so I tell people, one, we get to dream big dreams because of the people that came before us. I walked into an organization, Steve Stenderson is the name of my predecessor. He did a phenomenal job. I'm sitting in our training facility and overlooking a field. We own the building. We own the land outright, no debt. We're financially solvent and strong. We've got great membership. We've got great board. Our board is fantastic. And so our job is to elevate and take that to the next level in this moment, using LA 28, using Elevate 28, being commercially savvy and aggressive. And then our job is to pass it off to the next generation. After we make our dreams a reality, we pass it off to the next generation so they can dream even bigger dreams because of the work that we did. So that's how good organizations should run. So your legacy is really important. You should be able to hand this thing over really in a way that is stronger than we found it. And then someone else is going to take it even farther. And that's okay, because we've enabled them to do that. And so I think about it all the time.
It's really cool. I mean, it fuels it, right? Like, I think it's a tool if used correctly. I think it could be very ego driven if you don't have the right team around you to keep it as just more of a map than a destination. And so the way you embody and talk about legacy, I think, is just as powerful as what you're actually executing.
I like the idea of a map versus destination. I might be copying that one because I think it is very true. Because to your point, our legacy is not an endpoint. If it's an endpoint, then we probably haven't done a good job. Our legacy should be about, to your point, it's a map on a journey for others to take and run with. So
as the man behind me, which is why I have him, he said the journey is the destination, Mark, right? So I think that, if you can embody that, then you have to enjoy the process of the journey, right? And you never know when this is going to, part ways of the journey. But I think that, like, while we're still alive, like, that's ultimately, the gift that we have. And sports is, to me, just one of the most incredible mediums to go ahead and build that legacy that transcends all races, colors, creeds. It's just humans. It's just a human element, which I think is so exciting. Mark, this has been an incredible conversation. I want to spend the last couple moments focused on you, right? Like, as you have such a decorated career, I'm always curious. Leaders are lifelong learners. So what books are you reading? And when you reflect back on your journey, who's a mentor that sticks out to you that, sort of helps shape what you're doing today?
Wow, a lot there. So I'm reading a couple books at the same time, Thinking Slow and Fast, that Danny Kahneman, although it's a big book with small print and I'm a slow reader. So we'll start there. My daughter turned me on to Atomic Habits, so I'm listening to that.
Good one.
I just did book Range recently, which I thought was super fascinating, and just in terms of seeking expertise and knowledge from outside of a subject matter expertise and how diverse teams and diverse backgrounds really do drive outcomes and sampling. And, those to me are pretty good. I do like the Freakonomics podcast. family. I listen to freak out because I do like how economic outcomes are driven by emotion and we're not rational, and just the whole idea of I just learned in that both leadership but also business. From
Super
a
cool.
mentorship standpoint, I think there's a couple. One, I learned a lot by watching great coaches when I was at the Jets. I would watch Bill Parcells or watch Bill Belichick, Rex Ryan. I would watch some of these and I would learn from how they would lead people. And it was just some of the best teaching you could ever imagine. And I also have a friend by the name of Bob James, he's just a quiet, sage-like individual who every time I talk to him, I walk out of that conversation smarter. Just some people have that beauty of a skill set. So
it's so cool.
Folks I listen to.
No, and I appreciate you sharing. I think it's important. It takes a tribe to be able to go ahead and execute not only the day to day, but to stand up the legacy that you think, and spend so much time thinking about. And so it's always neat to get a look behind the curtain as to like, where's the center of influence come from? So, Marc, this has been incredible. If any of our listeners want to learn more, participate, get more information about what's going on as you guys, pillage towards 2028, where can they learn more about USA Lacrosse?
So usalacrosse.com. That's the best place to go. And there's everything there around, what we do from a mission perspective, what we do from a leadership perspective in the game at all levels, but everything from being a member to a donor to following our national teams, entertainment, a lot of great content, both entertaining as well as, say, utility around how to be a better coach, a better athlete. And there's just an enormous amount of information there, but usalacrosse.com is a great place to go and learn more.
Beauty. And we'll make sure we plug that. Marc, as always, man, you could be anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. We really appreciate it and excited to sit shotgun as we navigate the next few years and, get to celebrate hopefully some big wins in 2028 on the world stage. So best of luck with everything. We will stay close as this journey continues to unravel. And thank you for everything you're doing for the sporting ecosystem.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here. Really appreciate all you're doing.
Awesome. Talk soon, guys.